Hi, home bakers! Today I'm in the kitchen making soft and tender crescent rolls.
This dinner roll recipe makes beautifully soft, fluffy rolls that pair perfectly with soups, salads, or your favorite holiday feast. They're golden, pillowy, and irresistibly buttery. This is a go-to bread recipe for Thanksgiving, Christmas, or anytime you're craving bakery-style dinner rolls.
With simple ingredients, this recipe is beginner-friendly but tastes like it came straight from a bakery. And there's nothing better than the smell of fresh baked bread.
So let's get into the kitchen. This is how I make homemade crescent rolls.
To start this recipe, I'm going to make the bread dough. In the bowl of a stand mixer or in a large bowl if you're making the recipe by hand, mix 2 cups of warm milk and a 1/4 cup of sugar. Sprinkle on top 2 1/4 teaspoons of dry active yeast and set it aside for a few minutes for the yeast to soften. Now I'm going to mix in 3 cups of all-purpose flour, 1 egg, a 1/4 cup of softened butter, and 2 teaspoons of salt. If you're using a stand mixer for this, knead for 1 minute on low and then increase the speed to medium and knead for 4 more minutes. If you're kneading by hand, tip the dough out onto the counter and knead for 8 to 10 minutes or until smooth and elastic. Cover the bowl with plastic wrap or a damp kitchen towel and allow it to rise in a warm place until doubled. This takes about 1.5 hours, depending on the temperature of your kitchen. Now that my dough has nicely puffed up, I'm going to tip it out onto a lightly floured counter and split it into 4 equal pieces. I'm going to form each into a roll. I do this by folding each section of the dough over onto itself all the way around the circumference of the dough ball. Then flip it over and roll and tighten it to the counter with the palm of your hand. This will form the circular dough ball. Continue doing this with all the rest of the sections of dough. Then I'm going to cover them and allow the dough to rest for 10 minutes. This is going to allow the gluten to relax and make shaping the dough much easier. Now that my dough has rested, I'm going to roll each dough ball out into a circle about 8 inches across. Make sure to turn and flip the dough around often to make sure nothing's sticking to the counter or the rolling pin. You can dust it with a little flour as needed. Then I'm going to cut each circle like a pie into 8 equal wedges. I'm using a pizza wheel for this, but you could just as easily do this with a knife. Now I'm going to butter the top of each wedge with a little bit of melted butter. Then I'm going to roll each wedge up into a crescent shape. Place all the formed rolls onto a few lined baking sheets. Leave a little space between each to allow for enough room for them to rise. This recipe makes enough for 36 rolls, so I ended up filling 3 baking sheets. Now that all the rolls are formed, I'm going to let them rise in a warm place for about 1 hour or until doubled again. Once the rolls have puffed up again, they're ready to go into my preheated 375 degrees Fahrenheit or 190 degrees Celsius oven and bake for 18 to 20 minutes or until the tops are golden brown. Now you can skip the store-bought crescent rolls and make these from scratch with this easy, foolproof recipe. They're everything you crave in a dinner roll. Light and oh so soft with rich buttery flavor.
And as always, you can find a link to the full written recipe in the description box below.
Enjoy! If you're a fan of deliciously simple vintage recipes and old-fashioned skills, then you'll want to check out this next video. Thanks for stopping by.